The blood on her sleeve had dried dark brown by the time Ophelia Foster stumbled into the general store in Enid, Oklahoma, though she tried to hold her arm at an angle that might hide the stain from casual observation. The afternoon sun blazed through the dusty windows, catching motes of flour and tobacco in its harsh light as she moved slowly between the shelves, favoring her left side in a way she hoped nobody would notice. She had traveled 3 days to reach this town, each mile putting distance between herself and the nightmare she had fled, and now all she needed was enough supplies to disappear into the territories beyond, where questions went unasked and pasts remained buried. The cowboy leaning against the counter noticed everything. Xavier Kane had spent the better part of 30 years reading the subtle signs that separated honest folk from those running from something. And this woman, with her careful movements and downcast eyes, practically screamed trouble. He watched her reach for a can of beans on the upper shelf, saw the way her face tightened and her breath caught as she stretched upward, watched her abort the movement halfway through and lower her arm with deliberate slowness. Something was wrong. And in 1885, Wyoming territory where he usually worked, wrong things had a way of spreading like wildfire if left unchecked. But this was Oklahoma, and he was only passing through on his way to deliver horses to a ranch outside town. Ophelia felt his gaze on her like a physical weight and fought the urge to run. She had been running for so long that her legs ached with the memory of it, her entire body a map of pain she could not escape. She grabbed the beans from a lower shelf instead and moved toward the counter, keeping her eyes fixed on the scarred wooden surface rather than meeting the storekeeper's curious expression, or acknowledging the tall man who stood too close to where she needed to be. "That everything?" the storekeeper asked, tallying her meager purchases with quick efficiency. "Yes, sir." Her voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw from days without enough water, and nights spent crying into her bedroll where no one could hear. Xavier shifted his weight, and the movement drew her attention despite her best efforts. He was tall, broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked with their hands and their strength, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of winter storm clouds. His face was weathered from sun and wind but unlined by cruelty, and something in his expression made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not name. He looked at her with concern rather than suspicion, and that was somehow worse than hostility would have been. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that probably soothed skittish horses and calmed frightened children. "That's fine." She counted out her coins with fingers that trembled despite her best efforts to steady them, then gathered her purchases against her chest with her good arm. The movement jostled her ribs, and she could not quite suppress the sharp intake of breath that escaped her, could not stop her face from contorting briefly before she locked her expression back into careful neutrality. Xavier saw the wince, saw the way she held herself like something broken that had been poorly mended, and felt something shift in his chest. He had seen plenty of suffering in his years on the frontier, had witnessed enough cruelty to last several lifetimes. But there was something about this woman that got under his skin in a way he could not explain. Maybe it was the proud set of her shoulders despite obvious pain, or the fierce determination in her green eyes when she finally met his gaze for a fraction of a second before looking away. Maybe it was simply that he recognized the look of someone who had reached the absolute end of their rope and was hanging on by sheer stubborn will. "Forgive me for saying so, but you do not look fine." He kept his voice gentle, non-threatening, the same tone he used with abused animals that needed to learn not all humans meant harm. "That arm giving you trouble?" "I said I am fine." The words came out sharper this time, edged with desperation. She moved toward the door, hugging her supplies against her body despite the obvious discomfort it caused. Xavier made a decision that would change both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. He followed her out into the bright Oklahoma afternoon, where the heat shimmered off the dirt street and made the false-fronted buildings waver like mirages. "Miss, wait just a moment." Ophelia kept walking, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. She had nowhere to go except away, no destination beyond the horizon that would take her far from the man who had taught her that love was just another word for ownership. Her horse waited at the hitching post outside the boarding house where she had rented a room for the night, though she was not sure she had the strength to mount without revealing just how badly she was hurt. "Please." The single word stopped her, something in its tone cutting through her defenses. "I do not mean to frighten you or cause you trouble, but I have seen enough injuries in my time to know when someone is hurting badly, and you are hurting badly." She turned to face him, this stranger who looked at her with eyes that held no malice she could detect, and felt the weight of her secrets pressing against her ribs like a physical burden. "Why do you care? You do not know me." "No, I do not." Xavier stopped a respectful distance away, close enough to talk, but far enough that she could run if she felt the need. "But I know what it looks like when someone needs help and is too proud or too scared to ask for it. I have been that person more than once." The sun beat down on them both, and Ophelia felt sweat trickling down her spine to join the dried blood that crusted her shirt. Her head spun slightly, whether from heat or pain or blood loss she could not say, and the street seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She locked her knees and willed herself to remain upright through sheer determination. "Your right arm," Xavier said quietly. "The way you are holding it suggests maybe a deep cut or a burn. Am I close?" She said nothing, but something in her expression must have confirmed his guess, because he nodded slowly. "And your ribs on the left side. Bruised at least, maybe cracked. That is why you are breathing so shallow and holding yourself so stiff." "Stop." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Just stop. There is more, though." He took a half step closer, and she flinched instinctively before she could control the reaction. The flinch told him more than words could have, painted a picture he had seen too many times before. "You are favoring your right leg when you walk. Not much, but enough to notice if someone is paying attention. And the way you held your head tilted just slightly when you were in the store. Like maybe your hearing is not quite right on one side." Tears burned behind Ophelia's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had been so careful, had tried so hard to appear normal and unremarkable, and this stranger had catalogued her damage in less than 5 minutes. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing except the truth." Xavier kept his voice level, calm. "How did you get hurt? All of it, not just 1 or 2 injuries. Someone did this to you." It was not a question, and she could not find the energy to deny it. The street spun more violently and she staggered, would have fallen if he had not moved quickly to steady her with a hand on her good arm. His touch was gentle, completely unlike the brutal grips she had grown accustomed to, and the contrast broke something inside her that had been barely holding together. "I cannot." She forced the words through a throat tight with unshed tears. "If I tell anyone, he will find me. He always finds me." Xavier guided her carefully to the bench outside the general store, helping her sit before she collapsed. "Who will find you?" "My husband." The word tasted like poison. "Former husband, I suppose, though he would not see it that way. I ran while he was passed out drunk 3 nights ago. I took his horse and I ran, and I have been running ever since." He settled onto the bench beside her, leaving space between them, but staying close enough that she could feel his steady presence. "Tell me about the injuries, all of them, starting with the arm. Why?" She looked at him then, really looked, searching his face for some sign of the cruelty she had learned to expect. "Why do you want to know? What difference does it make?" "Because if I am going to help you, I need to know what I am dealing with." He met her gaze steadily. "And I am going to help you, whether you want me to or not. Call it a character flaw, but I have never been able to walk away when someone needs help." Something in his certainty steadied her, gave her the courage to speak truths she had never voiced aloud. "The arm is a knife cut. He came at me with a skinning knife 4 days ago because I let the stew burn. I blocked it with my arm instead of my face. It is deep, probably needs stitches, but I wrapped it as best I could and kept moving." Xavier felt rage building in his gut, cold and controlled, but fierce nonetheless. "What else?" "The ribs are from 2 weeks ago. He kicked me when I was on the ground. 3 times, maybe 4. I lost count." Her voice had gone flat, reciting facts without emotion, because emotion would shatter her. "I think 2 are cracked. It hurts to breathe deeply, and I cannot lie on that side. The leg? He threw me down the porch steps a month ago. My ankle twisted badly, and I thought it was broken at first. But I could still walk on it. It healed wrong, though, and now it aches constantly." Xavier's hands had curled into fists on his knees, and he deliberately unclenched them. Violence would not help this woman, would only prove that he was no different from the monster she had married. "Your hearing? He boxed my ear so hard last year that something inside ruptured. I bled for days, and the hearing never came back fully. Everything sounds muffled on that side, like I am underwater. She drew a shaky breath, and once she had started talking, she found she could not stop. The words poured out of her like poison being drained from a wound. There are burns on my back from when he held me against the stove, scars on my shoulders from when he used a belt with the buckle end, bruises in various stages of healing covering most of my body, a tooth he knocked loose that hurts when I chew, and nightmares every time I close my eyes. The litany of abuse sat heavy in the air between them, and for a long moment neither spoke. Ophelia stared at her hands, unable to believe she had told this stranger everything, had laid bare the shame and pain she had carried alone for 3 years of marriage to Walter Foster. Xavier looked at this woman who had survived hell and somehow remained unbroken, and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with recognition. She was a fighter, a survivor, and he respected that more than he could easily express. "Where is he now?" Xavier asked finally. "Your husband." "Probably tracking me. He is good at that, hunting things." She laughed bitterly. "He was a bounty hunter before we married. I thought that meant he was strong, capable, someone who could protect me. I did not realize I would be the one needing protection from him. You are not going back to him." It was not a suggestion, but a statement of absolute fact. Whatever it takes, wherever you need to go, you are not going back. Ophelia looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "You cannot promise that. You do not know Walter. He is mean and persistent, and he does not let go of things he considers his property. Then he will learn differently." Xavier stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let me get you to the doctor to look at that arm at least. Then we will figure out what comes next." She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her not to trust anyone, not to accept help that would inevitably come with strings attached. But her arm throbbed with infection starting to set in, and her ribs ached with every breath, and she was so tired of running alone. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet, swaying slightly as the world tilted again. "Easy." His arm came around her shoulders, supporting her weight without demanding anything in return. "The doctor is just down the street. Think you can make it?" "I have made it through worse." But she leaned into his strength anyway, too exhausted to maintain her pride. The doctor's office was blissfully cool after the heat of the street, and Dr. Harrison took one look at Ophelia before ushering her into the examination room. Xavier waited outside, pacing the small front room like a caged animal, while he listened to the low murmur of voices beyond the door. He had been in Enid for less than a week, had planned to deliver his horses and move on as he always did, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots or form attachments. Now he found himself invested in the fate of a woman he had known for less than an hour, and the intensity of his concern surprised him. When the doctor emerged nearly an hour later, his expression was grim. "She is resting now. I gave her something for the pain and cleaned that arm wound. She was right that it needed stitches, and it was starting to show signs of infection. Another day or two, and she might have lost the arm." He shook his head wearily. "The ribs are cracked as she suspected, and there is nothing to do for those except rest and let them heal. But Mr. Kane, the extent of her injuries goes far beyond what she initially mentioned. That woman has been systematically beaten for a long time." Xavier felt his jaw tighten. "I know, she told me." "Did she tell you about the partially healed fracture in her left wrist? Or the scars from cigarette burns on her stomach? Or the damage to her kidneys that suggests she has been repeatedly struck in the lower back?" Dr. Harrison's voice carried the weight of a man who had seen too much suffering. "That woman is carrying the accumulated trauma of years of abuse. She needs rest, proper food, and time to heal both physically and mentally. She should stay off that leg as much as possible for the next few weeks, keep the ribs wrapped, and change the bandage on her arm daily. She will have all of that." Xavier said it with complete certainty, though he had no idea yet how he would make it happen. "Can she be moved, or does she need to stay here?" "She can be moved if necessary, though I would prefer she rest here for a day or two first." The doctor studied him with shrewd eyes. "You are taking responsibility for her, then?" "I am making sure she is safe and taken care of." Xavier met his gaze steadily. "Her husband did this to her. She ran, and now she is terrified he will find her." "Then I hope for her sake he does not." Dr. Harrison turned back toward the examination room. You can see her now if you like. She is awake, just groggy from the laudanum." Ophelia was sitting on the examination table when Xavier entered, her arm freshly bandaged and her face pale, but more peaceful than it had been earlier. She looked up when he came in, and something in her expression made his heart clench unexpectedly. "Thank you," she said softly. "You did not have to do any of this." "Yes, I did." He pulled a chair close to the table and sat down, keeping himself at eye level with her rather than looming above. "The doctor says you need to rest for a few days before traveling again. I cannot afford to rest. Every hour I stay in one place is another hour Walter has to catch up to me." Despite her words, exhaustion dragged at her voice, and her eyes kept trying to close. "Let me worry about Walter." Xavier kept his tone calm, confident. "I have a room at the boarding house. You will take it, and I will sleep in the stable with my horses. You will rest and eat and let yourself heal, at least enough that you are not going to collapse the next time you have to ride hard. I cannot take your room. You can and you will. This is not up for debate." He softened the words with a slight smile. "Besides, my horses will appreciate the company. They get lonely." She wanted to argue further, but the laudanum was pulling her under, and the thought of a real bed called to her with siren song sweetness. "Just for tonight," she conceded. "Tomorrow I have to keep moving. We will talk about tomorrow when it comes." He stood and offered his hand again. "Come on, let me get you settled." The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions when Xavier explained that the lady needed a quiet room to recover from injuries. She showed them to his room on the second floor, a simple space with a bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the main street. Ophelia sank onto the bed with a sigh that bordered on relief, and Xavier pulled the curtains closed to block out the afternoon sun. "I will be right downstairs if you need anything," he told her. "Mrs. Chen will bring up some food when you wake. For now, just rest." "Xavier?" His name was unfamiliar on her tongue, but felt right somehow. "Why are you doing this? Really?" He considered the question, searching for an answer that would satisfy them both. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it, and I have been trying to pay that forward ever since. Because you deserve better than what you have gotten from life. Because I looked at you and saw someone worth fighting for, even if you do not see it yourself yet." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I do not know how to accept kindness anymore. Every time someone has been kind, there was always a price." "No price." He said it firmly, willing her to believe him. "Just rest. Everything else can wait." She was asleep before he closed the door, exhaustion finally claiming her now that she was somewhere safe and warm. Xavier stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to her breathing even out, then went downstairs to arrange for meals to be sent up and to collect his few belongings from the room. His saddlebags were easy to carry, and the stable behind the boarding house was clean and well maintained. His horses greeted him with soft wickers of recognition, and he settled onto a pile of clean straw in the corner of the stall, his rifle within easy reach. Sleep did not come easily. He kept seeing Ophelia's face as she recited the list of her injuries, kept hearing the flat emptiness in her voice as she described years of abuse. Xavier Kane had been a cowboy, and sometime lawman for most of his adult life, had delivered justice to plenty of men who deserved it. And he found himself hoping Walter Foster came looking for his wife. The world would be better off without men who beat women, and Xavier would be happy to deliver that particular message. The night passed slowly, punctuated by the sounds of the town settling into sleep around him. Xavier dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every unusual sound, his hand going automatically to his rifle before he identified the source as harmless. He was not sure what he was expecting, but the constant vigilance felt necessary. Somewhere out there, a violent man was searching for the woman sleeping upstairs, and Xavier had appointed himself her guardian, whether she wanted one or not. Dawn came with streaks of pink and gold across the Oklahoma sky, and Xavier woke stiff from sleeping on straw. He brushed himself off and headed to the town pump to wash before checking on Ophelia. Mrs. Chen met him at the bottom of the boarding house stairs with a knowing look in her dark eyes. "The lady woke twice in the night from bad dreams," she informed him quietly. "I sat with her until she settled both times. She ate some broth and bread the second time, which is good. She needs food to help her body heal." "Thank you for looking after her." Xavier meant it sincerely. "I will sit with her today so you do not have to keep checking." You care for her. Again, it was not a question. This is good. She needs someone to care. Too many women out here have no one. He could not deny the truth of her observation, so he simply nodded and climbed the stairs to his former room. He knocked softly and heard Ophelia's voice, stronger this morning than it had been yesterday, bid him enter. She was sitting up in bed, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and her color better after sleep and the food. The wariness had not left her eyes, but something in her posture seemed slightly less defensive than before. "Good morning," Xavier said, closing the door but leaving it unlatched for propriety. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday. Still hurt, but better." She gestured at the empty bowl on the bedside table. "Mrs. Chen brought food. She is kind." "She is." He pulled the chair close to the bed again, maintaining the respectful distance that seemed to help Ophelia relax. "She said you had nightmares. Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." Ophelia looked down at her bandaged arm. "Though I suppose it is obvious what I was dreaming about. Trauma takes time to heal, just like physical injuries. Probably longer, actually." Xavier spoke from experience, his own past haunted by things he tried not to think about in daylight hours. "You will have nightmares for a while. That is normal. Nothing about this feels normal." She met his eyes then, her green gaze searching his face for something she seemed to need. "I have been thinking about what you said yesterday, about helping me. What exactly did you have in mind?" "Honestly, I am making this up as I go." He appreciated her directness and answered in kind. "Short term, you need to rest and heal, at least enough that you are not at risk of falling off your horse from weakness. Medium term, you need to get far enough away from here that your husband cannot easily track you. Long term, you need to build a new life somewhere safe. That is a lot of steps." Her smile was bitter. "I have barely managed the first one, and I have been trying for 3 years to get away from him. This time, you have help." Xavier leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I was supposed to deliver horses to a ranch outside of town and then head back to Wyoming, but I can delay that. I can stay here for a few days while you recover, make sure you have supplies and a good horse, and then I can escort you to wherever you want to go. Safety in numbers. Why would you do that? You have your own life, your own responsibilities. The horses can wait. The ranch knows I will get there eventually, and they trust me to deliver what I promised." He held her gaze. "As for why, I already told you. Because you need help and I can provide it. Because I have skills that can keep you safe while you heal. Because walking away now would make me no better than all the other people who must have seen what was happening to you and did nothing." The accuracy of the last statement made Ophelia flinch. She had lost count of the number of times neighbors or shopkeepers or church members had seen her bruises and looked away, had heard her cries and closed their windows, had witnessed Walter's cruelty and called it a private matter between husband and wife. This stranger was the first person in 3 years to acknowledge what was happening and offer genuine help. "I do not even know you," she whispered. "What if you are as bad as he is? What if this is just another trap?" Xavier considered her question seriously, understanding the fear behind it. "You are right to be cautious. You have no reason to trust me except my word, and words are cheap. So here is what I propose. You rest here for 2 more days while you regain some strength. During that time, you can ask anyone in town about me. Mrs. Chen, the doctor, the shopkeeper, anyone. They will tell you I have been here a week, that I have caused no trouble, that I have paid my bills and treated people with respect. They will tell you I am known in these parts as someone reliable and honest. Then, if you decide you want my help, I will give it. If you decide you would rather go alone, I will give you supplies and money and wish you well. Either way, the choice is yours." The idea that she had a choice, that someone was giving her agency over her own life, was so foreign that Ophelia did not know how to process it. She had spent 3 years being told what to do, when to speak, how to act, with brutal punishment for any deviation from Walter's expectations. Now, this cowboy was offering her freedom without conditions, and it felt like a trick, even though her instincts said he was sincere. 2 days, she agreed finally. "But I pay you back for the doctor and the room. I do not take charity." "Fair enough." Xavier stood, respecting her need for pride. "I will be around town if you need anything. Mrs. Chen will check on you, and the doctor will want to look at that arm later today. For now, Just rest and eat and let your body start to heal." He left her then, heading out into the bright morning to check on his horses and make arrangements for the supplies Ophelia would need when she was ready to travel. The town was coming alive around him, shops opening and people moving about their daily business, and Xavier found himself studying faces and watching the roads leading into Enid with more attention than usual. Walter Foster was out there somewhere, and men like that did not give up easily on what they considered their property. The day passed quietly. Xavier helped at the stable, earning his keep by mucking stalls and repairing fence posts. He visited the general store and spoke with the shopkeeper, casually asking about the woman who had come in yesterday. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns, about the injured woman staying at Mrs. Chen's and the cowboy who had taken her under his protection. The shopkeeper assured him that folks thought it decent of him to help, that nobody had any patience for men who beat their wives, and that if Walter Foster showed his face in Enid, he would find a cold reception. Dr. Harrison examined Ophelia's arm in the late afternoon and pronounced himself satisfied with its healing. The infection was responding to the cleaning and the rest, and if she continued to keep it bandaged and clean, it should heal without lasting damage. The ribs were still painful, but would mend on their own time, and he encouraged her to move carefully, but not to stay completely bedridden. Light activity would help prevent her muscles from stiffening up. On the second day, Ophelia asked Mrs. Chen about Xavier Kane while the older woman brought up breakfast. Mrs. Chen sat on the edge of the bed, her weathered face kind and knowing. "He is a good man," she said simply. "I have run this boarding house for 15 years, since my husband died, and I have learned to read people. Mr. Kane is the kind who helps without asking for anything in return. He fixed my back fence without being asked, paid for his room in advance, and tips generously when I bring food. He is polite, clean, and respectful. The kind of man women can trust." "And you are sure he has no ulterior motives?" Ophelia needed to hear it confirmed. "I am sure he is attracted to you," Mrs. Chen said with typical bluntness. "That much is obvious to anyone with eyes, but being attracted is not the same as having bad intentions. He looks at you the way my husband used to look at me, like you are precious and worth protecting. That is not something to fear." The words stayed with Ophelia after Mrs. Chen left, circling in her mind as she tried to reconcile them with everything she had learned about men from Walter. Attraction had always meant danger in her marriage, had meant demands and violence and humiliation. The idea that someone could be attracted to her and still treat her with gentleness felt impossible. Yet, Xavier had done exactly that for 2 days now, without wavering. She was sitting by the window, watching the street, when Xavier came to check on her that afternoon. He knocked and waited for permission to enter, as he always did, and she found herself cataloging details about him she had been too tired and frightened to notice before. The way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested a past as complicated as her own. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all strong jaw and serious eyes, but it was the kindness in his expression that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "I have been asking about you," she announced before he could speak. "Everyone says you are trustworthy." "I am glad to hear it." He settled into his usual chair, apparently content to let her set the pace of the conversation. "Does that mean you have made a decision?" "I want your help." The words came out firm despite her nervousness. "If the offer still stands, I would like you to escort me somewhere safe and help me get started again." "The offer stands." Xavier felt relief wash through him, followed immediately by determination. "Where do you want to go?" "West, somewhere far from here, somewhere Walter has never been, maybe Colorado or even California eventually." She looked down at her hands. "I know that is a long journey for you to make just to help a stranger. I was heading west anyway." It was not entirely true, but it was true enough. "We will take it slow, make sure you have time to keep healing while we travel. Buy you a good horse, stock up on supplies, and head out as soon as the doctor says you are ready." "When?" "Tomorrow if you are up for it, day after if you need more time." He studied her carefully. "What do you think? Can you ride, or should we wait longer?" Ophelia thought about the gnawing fear that grew stronger each day she stayed in one place, the certainty that Walter was getting closer with every passing hour. "Tomorrow. I can ride tomorrow." "Then tomorrow it is." Xavier stood, his mind already working through the logistics of what they would need. I will get everything ready. You rest up and prepare for travel." That evening, Xavier purchased a sturdy mare for Ophelia, a calm, reliable animal that would not spook easily, along with a good saddle and enough supplies to last them several weeks on the trail. He cleaned his weapons and checked his ammunition, packed his saddlebags with careful efficiency, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that he was completely rearranging his life for a woman he had known for 3 days. The truth was that Ophelia Foster had gotten under his skin in a way no woman had managed in years. Maybe it was the strength he saw in her despite the obvious damage, or the fierce determination to survive that reminded him of his younger self. Maybe it was simply that he recognized a kindred spirit, someone who had been broken by life but refused to stay broken. Whatever the reason, Xavier found himself invested in her safety and her future in a way that went beyond simple chivalry or duty. He was not fool enough to call it love, not yet, but he recognized the potential for it, the way his heart lifted when she smiled, the protective fury he felt when thinking about her husband, the peace he experienced just sitting quietly in her presence while she healed. These were dangerous feelings for a man who had spent most of his adult life alone by choice, but Xavier found he did not want to fight them. For the first time in a long time, he wanted to stay instead of run, wanted to see where these feelings might lead if given the chance to grow. The night before they were set to leave, Xavier sat with Ophelia in her room as the sun set outside the window. She had been quiet all day, and he could see the fear building in her eyes as their departure grew closer. "What if he finds us?" she asked finally, voicing the terror she had been holding inside. "What if we ride out of town tomorrow, and he is waiting somewhere down the road?" "Then I will deal with him." Xavier said it calmly, a simple statement of fact. "Ophelia, I need you to understand something. I have been a cowboy, a ranch hand, a horse breaker, and occasionally a lawman when the situation called for it. I have faced down rustlers, outlaws, and men meaner than any you have probably met. I am not saying this to boast, but to reassure you. If your husband comes after you, he will have to go through me first, and I do not go down easy. He is dangerous. So am I, when I need to be." He held her gaze steadily. "You are not alone anymore. Remember that." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone could actually keep her safe from the nightmare that had been her marriage. "Tell me about yourself," she said, instead of voicing her doubts. "I know almost nothing about you except that you are kind and you help strangers." Xavier leaned back in his chair, considering what to share. "I grew up in Missouri, youngest of 5 brothers. My parents had a small farm, and we were poor but happy enough. When I was 17, my father died in an accident, and the farm went under. My brothers scattered to find work, and I headed west because I had heard there were opportunities for men willing to work hard. I ended up in Wyoming, hired on at a big ranch, and learned everything I know about horses and cattle and surviving on the frontier." "Family?" Ophelia asked softly. "I kept in touch with my brothers for a while, but we drifted apart over the years. Last I heard, 2 were in California, 1 was in Texas, and 1 had gone back east. My mother died 10 years ago." He felt the familiar ache of old grief, but pushed it aside. "Mostly I have been on my own since I left home. I like it that way, or at least I thought I did." "What changed?" "You." He said it simply, honestly. "Meeting you made me realize I have been running from connection for a long time because I did not want to risk getting hurt or losing anyone else. But that is a lonely way to live, and lately lonely has started to feel more like empty." Ophelia felt her breath catch at the raw honesty in his words. "I do not know how to be what someone needs. Walter spent 3 years telling me I was worthless, stupid, ugly, useless. I know those were lies meant to control me, but knowing and believing are different things." Xavier moved from the chair to kneel beside her, careful not to touch, but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "You do not have to be anything except yourself. You are brave and strong and resilient, and that is more than enough. The rest will come with time and healing." "I am terrified," she whispered, "of leaving, of being caught, of trusting you and having it turn out badly. I am terrified of everything. Fear is normal after what you have been through, but do not let it paralyze you." He smiled slightly. "Besides, being terrified and doing the thing anyway is basically the definition of courage. You have been courageous for 3 years just by surviving. Now you just have to be courageous a little bit longer." She reached out then, tentatively placing her hand over his where it rested on his knee. The touch sent electricity through them both, a connection that felt significant despite its simplicity. Xavier turned his hand over, palm up, and let her fingers rest in his without grasping or demanding. They sat like that as the light faded outside, two damaged people finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Morning came too quickly. Xavier helped Ophelia pack her few belongings and settle her account with Mrs. Chen, who hugged them both and made them promise to write when they reached wherever they were going. The doctor checked Ophelia's arm one final time and pronounced her fit to travel as long as she took it easy and changed the bandage daily. The shopkeeper gave them extra supplies for the road and refused to take full payment, saying it was the least he could do to help a woman escape a bad situation. The kindness of these near strangers made Ophelia's eyes burn with tears she could not quite shed. She had spent so long feeling isolated and alone, certain that nobody cared what happened to her. And now, an entire town was offering small gestures of support. It restored something in her that Walter had tried to destroy, a faith in basic human decency that she had thought lost forever. They rode out of Enid just after dawn, when the air was still cool and the town was quiet. Xavier kept them to a steady pace, mindful of Ophelia's injuries, and aware that pushing too hard too fast would only cause setbacks. He had plotted a route that would take them northwest toward Colorado, through territory he knew well enough to find water and shelter when needed. The first day passed without incident. They stopped frequently to rest the horses and allow Ophelia to stretch carefully, working out the stiffness from her healing ribs and wrist. Xavier proved to be good company, talking when she wanted conversation, and comfortable with silence when she needed quiet. He pointed out landmarks and wildlife, told stories about his years working ranches across the West, and made her laugh with tales of stubborn horses and ornery cattle. That night they made camp near a small creek, the sound of running water peaceful in the gathering darkness. Xavier built a fire and cooked beans and bacon, while Ophelia tended to the horses, moving slowly but growing stronger each day. They ate in comfortable silence, then sat watching the stars emerge one by one across the vast Oklahoma sky. "I never thanked you properly," Ophelia said eventually, "for everything you have done. I would not have survived much longer on my own. You do not need to thank me." Xavier poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "Though you are welcome. Why are you really doing this? The truth this time, not the polite answer you have been giving." He looked at her across the fire, her face half illuminated by the dancing flames, and decided she deserved honesty. "Because from the moment I saw you wince in that store, I could not stop thinking about you. Because you are brave and beautiful and worth protecting. Because when I look at you, I see possibility and hope and all the things I thought I had given up on. Is that honest enough?" Ophelia felt her heart stutter in her chest. "You barely know me. I know enough." He held her gaze. "I know you survived hell and came out still able to smile. I know you were determined to build a better life, even though you were terrified. I know you were kind to horses and polite to strangers and stronger than you give yourself credit for. That is enough for now. The rest we can learn as we go. I cannot promise you anything." She needed him to understand that. "I am broken in ways I do not even fully understand yet. I might never be whole again." "Nobody is whole." Xavier said it gently. "We are all broken in different ways. The question is whether we let that breakage define us, or whether we figure out how to keep living anyway. I think you have already proven which kind of person you are." They let the conversation lapse into silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned down to coals. Eventually, Xavier banked the embers and spread his bedroll on one side of the camp, while Ophelia took the other side, careful distance maintained between them. But as she drifted off to sleep, Ophelia found herself feeling safer than she had in years, protected not just by Xavier's presence, but by the growing trust between them. The days fell into a rhythm as they traveled. Wake at dawn, ride until mid-morning, rest during the heat of the day, ride again in the late afternoon, make camp at dusk. Xavier proved to be an excellent trail companion, skilled at finding good campsites and comfortable in the wilderness. He taught Ophelia things she had never learned growing up in a small town and then trapped in a violent marriage, showing her how to read the land for water, which plants were edible, how to start a fire with damp wood. In return, Ophelia shared pieces of her life before Walter. She had been a teacher in a small school, had loved children and books and the simple joy of helping young minds grow. Walter had made her quit after they married, saying no wife of his would work when he could provide. She talked about her parents, both dead from influenza when she was 19, about the loneliness that had made her vulnerable to Walter's initial charm, about the red flags she had ignored because she so desperately wanted to believe someone loved her. Xavier listened to all of it, never judging, never suggesting she should have known better or left sooner. He understood that leaving was never as simple as outsiders thought, that abusive relationships were traps designed to be inescapable. He had seen enough of them in his years drifting from town to town, enough women with haunted eyes and careful movements who smiled too little and flinched too much. On the 5th day out from Enid, they encountered other travelers for the first time. A family in a wagon heading east, a tired-looking man and woman with 3 small children, stopped to exchange news from the road ahead. The man eyed Xavier with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust strangers, but his wife smiled at Ophelia with genuine warmth. "Good to see another woman out here," she said, bouncing a fussy baby on her hip. "The trail gets lonely with only menfolk to talk to." They chatted for a few minutes about conditions ahead, about which towns had decent supplies and fair prices, about the weather predictions for the coming weeks. As they were preparing to part ways, the man pulled Xavier aside and spoke in a low voice. "You being followed?" he asked bluntly. Xavier felt adrenaline spike through his system. "Maybe. Why?" "Passed a lone rider 2 days back, heading west same as you are. Mean-looking fellow, asking about a woman matching your companion's description." The man jerked his head toward Ophelia, who was helping his wife entertain the children. "Said he was looking for his wife who had run off. Something about his tone did not sit right with me, so I told him I had not seen anyone, but thought you should know he is back there." "How far back?" Xavier kept his voice level, despite the cold fury building in his chest. "Day and a half, maybe 2 days, depending on how hard he is pushing his horse." He looked determined, though, and not in a good way. Xavier thanked him for the information and returned to Ophelia, who took one look at his face and paled. "What is wrong?" "We need to move." He helped her mount quickly, his mind already racing through their options. "Your husband is behind us, maybe 2 days back. We need to put more distance between us." The fear that flashed across Ophelia's face made Xavier want to tear Walter Foster apart with his bare hands. But he pushed the rage aside in favor of practical action. They said quick goodbyes to the family and pushed their horses into a faster pace, eating up miles while the sun climbed toward its zenith. They rode hard for 3 hours before Xavier allowed them to stop and rest the horses. Ophelia was pale and shaking, whether from exertion or fear he could not tell, but she dismounted without complaint and helped unsaddle the animals so they could drink at a nearby stream. "He is never going to stop looking for me," she said flatly, her voice empty of emotion. "I could run to the ends of the earth, and he would still come after me. He told me once that if I ever tried to leave, he would hunt me down and make me wish I was dead. He is not going to get the chance." Xavier checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. "We are going to change our route, head north for a bit to throw him off our trail. And if he does catch up to us, I will handle it. I promise you, Ophelia, he will not touch you again. You cannot know that." She sank down onto a rock, exhaustion and fear warring in her expression. "Walter has killed men before. That was his job, bringing in bounties dead or alive. He is good with a gun, and he is mean enough to shoot first and not bother with questions. So am I, when necessary." Xavier sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I have never killed anyone who did not give me cause. But I will not hesitate if it means keeping you safe. You need to understand that." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the steel beneath his gentle exterior. Xavier Kane was a good man, but he was also a dangerous one when the situation called for it, and right now the situation was calling for it very loudly. "I do not want you to get hurt because of me, and I do not want you to spend the rest of your life running and afraid." He covered her hand with his, the gesture becoming familiar between them. "Let me do this. Let me stand between you and him. You have been fighting alone for too long." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, all the fear and exhaustion and tentative hope breaking through the careful control she had maintained. Xavier pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries, and let her cry against his chest while he murmured reassurances into her hair. She felt small and fragile in his embrace, but he knew that fragility was deceptive. This woman had steel in her spine and fire in her heart, and she just needed time and support to remember that. They stayed there by the stream longer than was probably wise, but Xavier sensed Ophelia needed the moment to fall apart and put herself back together. When she finally pulled away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, she looked determined rather than defeated. "What do we do?" she asked. "We ride north for a day, then cut west again once we have confused the trail. We find a town big enough to have a sheriff, and I will report that a violent man is stalking his former wife. We make it as difficult as possible for him to find us, and if he does find us anyway, we end it." Xavier spoke with calm certainty. "One way or another, this ends. You are not going to spend your life looking over your shoulder." They remounted and rode until well after dark, pushing themselves and their horses harder than was comfortable but necessary. When they finally made camp, Xavier insisted on taking first watch while Ophelia tried to sleep. She lay in her bedroll, staring up at the stars, and tried not to imagine Walter closing the distance between them with every passing hour. Xavier kept his vigil, rifle across his knees, ears straining for any sound that did not belong to the normal night noises of the prairie. He found himself praying to a God he had not spoken to in years, asking for the strength and skill to protect the woman who had somehow become the center of his world in less than 2 weeks. He had faced danger before, had been in his share of fights and tight situations, but never before had the stakes felt this personal. If he failed, if Walter got past him, Ophelia would suffer in ways he could not bear to contemplate. Morning came gray and overcast, threatening rain. They ate a cold breakfast and moved out quickly, continuing their northern detour. The landscape changed gradually as they rode, becoming more rolling with occasional stands of cottonwoods along dry creek beds. Xavier watched their back trail constantly, looking for any sign of pursuit, while Ophelia pushed through her pain and exhaustion with grim determination. Around midday, the rain started, a steady drizzle that soaked through their clothes and turned the ground slippery. Xavier called a halt in a sheltered draw, where a rocky overhang provided some protection from the weather. He built a small fire with dry wood from his saddlebags and put coffee on to boil, while Ophelia changed into a dry shirt from her pack. "How much farther to the next town?" she asked, wrapping her hands around the tin cup he handed her. "Another 2 days if the weather clears, 3 if it stays like this." He settled beside her, their backs against the rock wall. "Town called Sterling, decent size, has a proper sheriff. We can rest there for a few days, let you heal more, and make a plan. And if Walter catches us before we get there, then we deal with it." Xavier met her eyes. "But I would rather it happen in a town where there are witnesses and law enforcement. Makes things cleaner." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain patter against the overhang and watching steam rise from their coffee cups. Despite the circumstances, despite the danger tracking them through the rain, Ophelia felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, someone was on her side, fighting for her rather than against her. It made all the difference. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Anything. When this is over, when Walter is no longer a threat one way or another, what happens then? Between us, I mean." She kept her eyes on her coffee, unable to look at him while asking such a vulnerable question. Xavier considered his answer carefully, knowing it mattered. "I would like to see where this goes, if you are willing. I know the timing is terrible, and you have no reason to trust romance after what you have been through. But, Ophelia, I care about you, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time. So when this is over, I would like the chance to court you properly. Take you to dinner, go for walks, spend time together without running for our lives. See if what I feel and what you might feel could turn into something lasting. I think I would like that too." She risked a glance at him and found him watching her with such open affection that it made her chest tight. "I am terrified of it, but I think I would like it." "Terrified is okay. We can be terrified together." He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and wonderful. No pressure, no expectations. Just time and space to figure out what we might mean to each other. The rain continued through the afternoon and into the evening, forcing them to stay in their makeshift shelter longer than planned. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams, learning the small details that made each other human. Ophelia talked about her hopes of teaching again someday, of opening a school in a town that needed one. Xavier talked about his desire to have his own ranch eventually, a place where he could raise horses and put down roots. Their visions of the future began to intertwine as they talked, each imagining how the other might fit into their plans. It was premature and probably foolish, but neither of them could help it. Something had sparked between them that first day in Enid, and the danger they faced together had fanned that spark into something brighter. As darkness fell and the rain finally tapered off, Xavier insisted Ophelia sleep while he kept watch again. She tried to argue, knowing he needed rest too, but he gently overrode her objections. "I have gone days without real sleep before," he assured her, "and I am too keyed up to rest anyway. Better to have someone alert and watching than both of us exhausted. You can take watch tomorrow night if it makes you feel better." She settled into her bedroll reluctantly, but exhaustion claimed her quickly. Xavier sat watching her sleep, her face peaceful in a way it never was when she was awake, and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. Walter Foster would not touch her again. Whatever it took, however far they had to run or hard they had to fight, Xavier would keep her safe. It was not just duty or chivalry anymore. It was love, though he had not spoken that word aloud yet. But he felt it in every fiber of his being, recognized it as surely as he recognized the sunrise. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown through overnight. They made good time across the drying prairie, and by evening they could see Sterling in the distance, a cluster of buildings that promised safety and rest. Xavier felt some of the tension leave his shoulders as they approached, though he remained vigilant. They were not safe yet, not until they had reinforcements and a plan. The sheriff of Sterling was a grizzled man named Jack Reeves, who listened to their story with increasing anger, his weathered face darkening as Ophelia described her marriage and escape. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked between them. "I have heard of Walter Foster," he said grimly. "Man has a reputation as a tracker and a bounty hunter, and not a good reputation at that. Rumor says he is more interested in collecting the bounty than whether his targets are brought in alive. You are right to be running from him, madam." "Can you help us?" Xavier asked. "Keep watch for him. Arrest him if he shows up here." "I can, and I will." Reeves stood and pulled a wanted poster from a stack on his desk. "As it happens, Foster has paper on him. Nothing major, just drunk and disorderly charges from a town east of here. But it is enough to hold him if he comes through Sterling. In the meantime, you two should stay close to town where there are witnesses and help if needed." They took a room at the hotel, separate rooms this time out of propriety, and Xavier finally allowed himself to relax slightly. Sterling was big enough that they could blend in, protected enough that Walter would have trouble taking Ophelia by force even if he tracked them here. They had breathing room to plan their next move. That night, Xavier took Ophelia to dinner at the town's small restaurant, insisting she needed a proper meal after weeks of trail food. She wore the only dress she owned, a simple blue cotton thing that had seen better days, and Xavier thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. They talked over steak and potatoes, their conversation easy and comfortable, and for a few hours they were just two people enjoying each other's company rather than fugitives on the run. "Thank you for this," Ophelia said as they walked back to the hotel under a sky full of stars. "For treating me like a person rather than a problem to be solved." "You are a person, Ophelia, a remarkable one." Xavier stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to know something. Regardless of what happens with Walter, regardless of how this all turns out, these past weeks with you have been the best I have had in years. You have reminded me what it feels like to care about someone, to want to be better for another person's sake. So thank you for that." She looked up at him, this good man who had appeared in her life exactly when she needed him most, and felt her heart open in ways she had thought permanently closed. "Xavier, I think I am falling in love with you, which is terrifying and probably too fast, and maybe a terrible idea given everything I have been through. But it is true." His smile was incandescent. "I think I am falling in love with you too. Have been since I saw you wince in that general store, and decided right then that I was going to help you no matter what it took." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, asking permission with every movement. Ophelia leaned into him, letting herself feel safe and cherished in his embrace, tasting hope on his lips. It was nothing like the demanding, brutal kisses Walter had forced on her. Nothing like the violation that had been her marriage. This was tenderness and affection and the promise of something better, and it made her want to cry and laugh simultaneously. They broke apart slowly, standing close together in the darkened street, and Ophelia rested her forehead against Xavier's chest. What if this does not work out? What if I am too damaged to be what you need? Then we figure it out together. His arms came around her, strong and protective without being confining. But I do not think you are as damaged as you fear. Hurt, yes. Traumatized, absolutely. But not broken beyond repair. You are here, you are surviving, you are learning to trust again. That is not damage, that is healing. They stayed like that for a long moment before Xavier finally walked her to her hotel room and bid her good night with another sweet kiss. Ophelia lay in her bed, touching her lips and marveling at the fact that she could feel happiness again, that the capacity for joy had not been completely beaten out of her. Xavier Kane had given her that, had shown her through patience and kindness that not all men were like Walter, that love could be gentle instead of cruel. 3 days passed in Sterling without incident. Ophelia visited the doctor to have her arm checked and the stitches removed, and he pronounced himself impressed with her healing. The ribs were still tender, but improving, and her other injuries were fading to yellow-green bruises rather than fresh purple marks. Xavier helped around town, doing odd jobs for pay and keeping his ear to the ground for any news of Walter Foster. On the 4th morning, the sheriff came to find them at breakfast with news that made Xavier's blood run cold. "But Foster is here," Reeves said without preamble. "Rode in about an hour ago, asking around about a woman matching Mrs. Foster's description. I told him I had not seen anyone like that, but he is not the type to give up easy. He is drinking at the saloon right now, and I figure it is only a matter of time before someone points him your direction, despite my warnings not to." Ophelia went white, her fork clattering to her plate. Xavier reached across the table and took her hand, grounding her with his touch. "What do you want to do?" he asked Reeves. "Can you arrest him on those outstanding charges?" "I can, but I would rather catch him in the act of causing trouble. That way the charges stick better, and he serves actual time, instead of paying a fine and being released." The sheriff looked grim. "I do not like using you as bait, madam, but if he approaches you in a threatening manner with witnesses around, I can make sure he goes away for a long time. I will not put Ophelia in danger." Xavier's voice was flat with finality. "There has to be another way." "There is?" Ophelia surprised them both by speaking, her voice steadier than her hands. "I confront him. With witnesses and the sheriff nearby, I tell him our marriage is over and he needs to leave me alone. If he reacts violently, which he will, then Sheriff Reeves arrests him. If by some miracle he agrees to leave peacefully, then we have that resolution. Either way, this ends today." "Absolutely not." Xavier could not believe what he was hearing. "You are not going anywhere near that man." "I have to." She met his eyes, and he saw determination burning there alongside the fear. "Xavier, I have been running from Walter for weeks, and I will be running for the rest of my life unless I face him and end this. I cannot live that way, always looking over my shoulder, always terrified. So, yes, I am going to confront him, with you and the sheriff backing me up. It is time to stop being afraid." Xavier wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the hotel room and handle Walter himself, but he understood the need he saw in her face. This was about more than just safety. It was about reclaiming her agency, proving to herself that she was not the helpless victim Walter had tried to make her. He did not like it. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, but he respected her right to make the choice. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this smart. Public place, plenty of witnesses, and I stay close enough to intervene the second things go wrong." They made a plan. Ophelia would be in the general store, visible through the front window, while Xavier positioned himself outside where he could watch through the glass. Sheriff Reeves would be in the alley beside the store with 2 deputies, ready to move the moment they were needed. Other townspeople would be informed to stay clear, but observe from safe distances, providing the witnesses that would ensure Walter could not claim self-defense or make up false charges. It took an hour to set up, the longest hour of Xavier's life. He watched Ophelia move through the store, pretending to shop while her hands shook and her face stayed pale. He wanted to call the whole thing off, wanted to ride out of Sterling with her and keep running, but he knew she was right. Running solved nothing long-term. This had to end here and now. Walter Foster walked into the general store at 10:30 in the morning, and Xavier felt rage spike through him at the first sight of the man who had tortured Ophelia for years. He was average height and build, unremarkable in appearance except for the cruelty etched into the lines around his mouth and the coldness in his pale eyes. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who enjoyed inflicting pain. Ophelia heard the door open and turned, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Walter stopped when he saw her, a slow smile spreading across his face that made her stomach churn with remembered terror. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying that familiar dangerous edge. "I have been looking for you, wife." "I am not your wife anymore." Ophelia was proud that her voice only trembled slightly. "I left you, and I am not coming back. That is not how this works." Walter moved closer, and she forced herself to stand her ground, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "You are my property, my wife, and you are coming home with me right now." "No." The single word felt like victory. "I am never going anywhere with you again. You beat me, terrorized me, made my life hell for 3 years. That is over now." His expression darkened, fury replacing the false smile. "You ungrateful little wretch. After everything I have done for you, put a roof over your head, food in your belly, this is how you repay me? By running off and embarrassing me in front of the whole territory? You did not provide for me. You imprisoned me." Ophelia felt strength flowing through her with every word, 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. "You hit me, kicked me, burned me, cut me. You destroyed everything good in me and tried to make me believe I deserved it. But I did not deserve it, Walter. Nobody deserves what you did to me. You need to learn your place." His hand went to his belt, an unconscious gesture that spoke of long habit, and Ophelia flinched despite her determination not to. "Come here right now, or I will make you regret ever being born. Touch her, and you are a dead man." Xavier's voice cut through the tension like a knife, and Walter spun to see the tall cowboy standing in the doorway with his hand resting casually on his pistol. His eyes narrowed as he assessed this new threat. "This does not concern you, stranger. This is between me and my wife." "Former wife," Xavier corrected, moving into the store with predatory grace. "And it concerns me because Ophelia is under my protection now. So here is how this is going to work. You are going to walk out of this store, mount your horse, and ride out of Sterling. You are going to stop looking for Ophelia, stop harassing her, and never come near her again. Do that, and you walk away alive." Walter laughed, an ugly sound full of contempt. "Or what? You will shoot me in front of witnesses? You will hang, cowboy." "Self-defense." Sheriff Reeves walked into the store from the back room, his badge glinting in the morning light. Mr. Kane would be defending a woman from her violent, estranged husband. No jury in the world would convict. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. Walter Foster, you have outstanding warrants in 3 counties for drunk and disorderly conduct, assault, and destruction of property. I am placing you under arrest." Walter's hand dropped to his gun, and everything happened very fast. Xavier drew and fired in one smooth motion, his bullet taking Walter in the shoulder and spinning him around. The gun flew from Walter's hand and skittered across the floor as he fell, clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing viciously. The deputies rushed in and hauled Walter to his feet, dragging him toward the jail while he screamed threats and obscenities. Xavier holstered his weapon and crossed immediately to Ophelia, who stood frozen in shock, staring at the spot where Walter had fallen. "It is over," Xavier said gently, turning her to face him. "He cannot hurt you anymore. He is going to jail, and by the time he gets out, you will be so far away, he will never find you again." She looked up at him with wide eyes, and then suddenly she was sobbing, great gasping cries of relief and terror and release. Xavier held her while she cried, ignoring the curious stares of the townspeople who had witnessed the confrontation. Nothing mattered except the woman in his arms and the fact that she was finally, truly safe. Sheriff Reeves returned after locking Walter in a cell and assured them that Foster would be transferred to territorial court within the week to face multiple charges. The combination of the warrants, the assault attempt in the store, and testimony from Ophelia about years of abuse would likely put him away for a significant period. Even after his release, he would be a wanted man if he came near Ophelia again. It was really over. The nightmare that had consumed Ophelia's life for 3 years had ended in a general store in Sterling, Oklahoma, with a cowboy who loved her standing guard and an entire town bearing witness to her courage. That evening, as the sun set in shades of orange and gold, Xavier and Ophelia sat on the porch of the hotel and tried to process everything that had happened. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving them both exhausted but peaceful. "What now?" Ophelia asked, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "We do not have to run anymore. I do not know what to do with that kind of freedom. Now we build the life you want." Xavier wrapped his arm around her carefully. "We can stay here if you like, Sterling, or keep traveling if you want to see more of the West. You can open that school you talked about, teach children, and make a difference. I can find work on a ranch or start building toward having my own place someday. We figure it out together, one day at a time." Together! She tasted the word and found she liked it. "I think I would like that very much." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the town settle into evening routines around them. Finally, Ophelia spoke again, her voice soft but sure. "Xavier Kane, would you do me the honor of courting me properly? I believe you mentioned something about dinner and walks and spending time together without running for our lives." He laughed, the sound full of pure joy. "Ophelia Foster, I would be honored. Though I have to warn you, I am terrible at small talk, and I have no idea how to be romantic. You saved my life, healed my wounds both physical and emotional, and showed me what real love looks like. I think you are more romantic than you give yourself credit for." She turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and sweet. "Besides, we have time to figure it out." They spent the next 2 months in Sterling, while the legal proceedings against Walter Foster worked their way through the territorial court system. Ophelia testified about years of abuse, and her testimony combined with the doctor's reports of her injuries and statements from townspeople who had seen Walter's violent behavior ensured he was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. She walked out of the courthouse after his sentencing, feeling lighter than she had in years, as if a weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted from her shoulders. During those months, Xavier courted her with a sweetness that made her fall deeper in love every day. He took her to church socials and town dances, walked with her along the creek at sunset, brought her flowers and books and small trinkets that made her smile. They talked about everything, learning each other's hopes and dreams and fears, building a foundation of trust and affection that would last a lifetime. Ophelia found work helping at the local school, assisting the elderly teacher who welcomed the help managing 30 students of various ages. She discovered that teaching still brought her joy, that working with children still felt like her calling, despite everything Walter had done to suppress it. The teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, encouraged Ophelia to take over the school when she retired the following year. Xavier found work at a nearby ranch, breaking horses and helping with the fall cattle drive. The rancher, impressed with his skills and work ethic, offered him a permanent position with the promise of a share in the ranch eventually if he stayed on long term. It was the kind of opportunity Xavier had dreamed about for years, a chance to build something lasting and stable. One evening in late November, as the first snow of winter dusted the prairie white, Xavier invited Ophelia for a walk despite the cold. She bundled in her warmest coat and took his arm, curious about his nervous energy. They walked to the edge of town, where the prairie stretched endlessly under a sky turning purple with dusk. Xavier stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Ophelia Foster, I have thought a lot about what I want to say, and I still have no idea if these are the right words." He smiled ruefully. "So, I am just going to speak from my heart and hope it is enough. You have changed my life in ways I never expected. You have shown me what it means to be truly brave, to face impossible odds and survive through sheer force of will. You have made me want to be better, to build something lasting, instead of always drifting from place to place. You have made me believe in love again after years of thinking it was not for me. So I am asking if you will have me. If you can see yourself building a life with a cowboy who has more heart than money and more determination than sense, would you consider marrying me?" Tears streamed down Ophelia's face, but she was smiling through them. "Xavier Kane, I would be honored to marry you. You save me in every way a person can be saved, and I love you more than I have words to express." "Yes, absolutely yes," He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and when they finally broke apart, they were both laughing and crying simultaneously. Xavier produced a simple gold band from his pocket, a ring that had belonged to his mother and had been sitting in his saddlebag for years, waiting for the right woman. He slid it onto Ophelia's finger, where it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They married in early December in Sterling's small church, with half the town in attendance to witness the union of the cowboy and the woman he had saved. Mrs. Chen traveled from Enid for the ceremony, bringing with her a beautiful quilt she had made as a wedding gift. Sheriff Reeves stood as Xavier's best man, and Mrs. Patterson stood up with Ophelia. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the entire congregation cheered. The early years of their marriage were not always easy. Ophelia had nightmares that woke her screaming, moments when Xavier's innocent touch would make her flinch before she remembered she was safe. But Xavier was patient and understanding, never pushing her beyond what she could handle, always giving her space to heal at her own pace. Gradually, the nightmares came less frequently, the flinching stopped, and Ophelia learned that married life could be filled with laughter and joy instead of fear and pain. When Mrs. Patterson retired the following spring, Ophelia took over the Sterling School and proved to be a gifted teacher. Children flourished under her patient guidance, and parents praised her ability to see the potential in every student. The school became the heart of the community, a place where learning was celebrated and every child felt valued. Xavier thrived at the ranch, his skill with horses becoming locally famous. The rancher made good on his promise, offering Xavier a 20% stake in the operation after 3 years of exemplary work. With that stake and their combined savings, Xavier and Ophelia began building their own small ranch on land adjacent to the main property. It was hard work, building a house and corrals and breaking land for crops, but they did it together and took pride in every accomplishment. 2 years into their marriage, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror, memories of Walter's violence making her fear for the safety of her child. But Xavier was ecstatic and devoted, treating her like precious china and already planning for their baby's future. Their son was born on a warm summer evening in 1888, a healthy baby boy with Xavier's dark hair and Ophelia's green eyes. They named him Michael, after Xavier's father, and he became the center of their world. Xavier was a devoted father, gentle and playful with his son, determined to be everything his own father had been, and nothing like the man who had hurt Ophelia. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, a tiny girl they named Sarah, who had her father's serious expression and her mother's stubborn determination. Their home filled with laughter and the chaos of small children, and Ophelia sometimes had to stop and marvel at how completely her life had transformed. From the nightmare of her first marriage to this beautiful second chance, from abuse and terror to love and safety, she had traveled an impossible distance. As the years passed, their ranch grew and prospered. Xavier's reputation as a horsebreaker spread throughout the territory, and people came from hundreds of miles away to purchase horses he had trained. Ophelia continued teaching, taking a few years off when the children were small, but returning once they were old enough for school themselves. She wrote a series of primers for teaching children to read that were eventually published and distributed throughout the Western territories. They had 2 more children over the years, another son named Thomas and a daughter named Elizabeth. Their house rang with the sounds of children growing up loved and safe, learning by example what a healthy marriage looked like. Xavier and Ophelia made sure their children understood that love meant partnership and respect, that disagreements could be resolved without violence, that every person deserved to be treated with dignity. Walter Foster died in the territorial prison 6 years into his sentence, killed in a fight with another inmate over a card game. When word reached Ophelia, she felt nothing except relief that he was truly gone and could never threaten anyone else. She had long since stopped thinking about him regularly, had reclaimed her life so completely that he existed only as a shadow from her past, rather than a present fear. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Ophelia on a trip to Denver, their first real vacation together without children. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at restaurants with white tablecloths, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as they walked through the city's gaslit streets, Ophelia stopped and pulled Xavier into an alley where she kissed him thoroughly. "Thank you," she said when they came up for air. "For what?" Xavier was smiling, his arms around her waist. For seeing me wince that day in the general store, for caring enough to ask about my injuries until I told you the truth, for standing between me and the man who hurt me, for showing me what real love looks like, for giving me a life beyond anything I dared to dream. She cupped his face in her hands. You saved my life, Xavier Kane, not just by helping me escape Walter, but by teaching me that I was worth saving. You saved mine right back. He kissed her forehead gently. I was drifting, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You gave me purpose and love and a reason to build instead of wander. We saved each other. They returned to Sterling, renewed and reconnected, diving back into their busy life with their children and their growing ranch. The years continued to pass in a blur of school years and cattle drives, birthdays and holidays, the slow, steady accumulation of a life well lived. When Ophelia turned 40, their children were mostly grown. Michael was 20 and running much of the day-to-day ranch operations alongside his father. Sarah was 18 and engaged to a young rancher from a neighboring property. Thomas was 14 and showing signs of wanting to be a teacher like his mother. Elizabeth, at 12, was still deciding what she wanted to be, but excelled at everything she tried. Xavier and Ophelia sat on the porch of the home they had built together, watching the sun set over their land, and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that day in Enid when a cowboy had noticed a woman's wince and refused to look away, to this moment of peace and prosperity, they had traveled a long and sometimes difficult road. But they had traveled it together, and that made all the difference. Do you ever regret it? Ophelia asked, her hand in Xavier's as it had been countless times over the years. Taking on a broken woman and her problems, completely rearranging your life for someone you barely knew? Never. He said it without hesitation. You were never broken, just hurt. And you were not someone I barely knew. You were someone I recognized on sight as being important. I do not believe in fate or destiny particularly, but I believe I was meant to be in that general store that day. I was meant to see you wince and ask the questions that led to you telling me the truth. Everything since has been the best years of my life. Mine too. She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. I never thought I would find love again after Walter. I thought I was too damaged, too afraid, too broken. But you showed me that the right person does not see damage. They see possibility. You loved me before I could love myself again, and that made all the difference. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, their children's laughter drifting from inside the house, their grandchildren yet to come, but already anticipated with joy. The nightmare of Ophelia's first marriage had faded to a distant memory, replaced by years of happiness and love and partnership. She had survived hell and found heaven on the other side, and it all started with a cowboy who saw her wince and cared enough to ask why. Years later, after Xavier and Ophelia had both passed peacefully into old age, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, people in Sterling would still tell their story. They would talk about the brave woman who escaped an abusive marriage and the good man who helped her heal, about how they built a life and a legacy together that lasted generations. The school Ophelia founded still stood, teaching children to read and dream and believe in themselves. The ranch Xavier built still operated, run by descendants who inherited his love of horses and honest work. But more than the tangible things they left behind, Xavier and Ophelia Kane left a legacy of hope. They proved that it was never too late to start over, that abuse did not have to be a life sentence, that love could heal even the deepest wounds if given the chance. Their story inspired other women to leave dangerous situations, encouraged other men to intervene when they saw someone in need, and showed an entire community what real love and partnership looked like. In the end, that day in the general store in Enid, Oklahoma, when Xavier saw Ophelia wince and asked about each injury until she told him the whole truth, changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. It was a moment that rippled outward in ways neither could have predicted, proving that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, noticing someone's pain, and caring enough to help, could change the entire course of multiple lives. And that was a legacy worth leaving behind.